Christmas is a time when people typically go home to be with family and friends. But in the midst of a global pandemic, sadly, many people spent this holiday season far from their homes. In an effort to gain some perspective, I want to tell a story about the most remote Christmas celebration in human history, the very first Christmas in space. And I'm not talking about the infamous Star Wars holiday special starring Jefferson Starship and the Golden Girls actress Bea Arthur. I'm talking about the Apollo 8 space mission. Although it has since been eclipsed by the famous Apollo 11 mission, which landed Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon, or the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission, which was the basis of the hit Tom Hanks film. At its time, the Apollo 8 mission was the single most widely viewed event in history. Not only because it was the first time that humans had traveled to another world, but also in part because of the unique timing. You see, the mission launch date was December 21st, 1968, and using the Saturn V rocket technology at the time, it took almost 3 days to make the journey to the moon. That means that they arrived at their destination on Christmas Eve, 1968. Upon arrival, they orbited the moon about 10 times in twice as many hours before beginning the return trip to Earth on Christmas Day, and landing safely on Earth 3 days later. This meant that people all over the world would be home and free to watch the event on their TV sets. Astronaut Frank Borman recalls, "We were told that on Christmas Eve we would have the largest audience that had ever listened to a human voice, and the only instructions that we got from NASA was to do something appropriate." But coming up with something appropriate was not as easy as it might seem. At first, they considered spreading the traditional Christmas message of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. But at the height of the Cold War, and with the war in Vietnam escalating, they felt that this message might be perceived as hypocritical. They considered simply reading the nativity story, but instead, they opted to read the first 10 verses from the book of Genesis. The reasoning behind this, according to James Lovell, was that this was the foundation of many of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion. There are many other people in other religions than the Christian religion around the world, and so this would be appropriate to that. The idea for this broadcast was decided well ahead of time, and in fact, it was included in the original flight plan, but I like to imagine that it had something to do with this photo, simply called Earthrise. This was the first time that humans had ever seen their homeworld as viewed from another world. This experience had a profound effect on all 3 astronauts. Seeing Earth for the first time as little more than a feature of the night sky must have been incredibly humbling. It reminds me of my first Christmas visiting my family after moving out on my own. Seeing home from the outside looking in, all the little squabbles with siblings, arguments with parents, sort of slipped by the wayside, as the idea of home became more of an abstract concept, a sort of platonic ideal that represented things like family and love. Looking at Earth from this vantage point, I can imagine the astronauts being deeply moved and wanting to find a message not only for Americans and not only for Christians, but for all of the people who inhabit this little blue planet called home. As we spend the holidays this year isolated from each other in our own little bubbles, it's this Christmas message and this larger concept of home that I hope we can all remember. As fellow astronaut Eugene Cernan wrote, "We went to explore the moon and in fact discovered the Earth." As these 3 astronauts prepared for their journey home, Mission Control was eager to make sure that they had made all the correct maneuvers. Their one response was, "Roger, please be informed there is a Santa Claus."